And that's probably what's behind the US reluctance to hand over F-16s. They're not a game changer if you can't use them in the way that NATO can. That doesn't mean there isn't some middle ground. And that would be the package that I'd like to see given to Ukraine. Some better electronic warfare, integrate F-16s with a better use of drones, some better surface-to-air missile capability to keep the Russian Air Force on the back foot. And then the Ukrainians would get some of that localized air superiority, and some relief from the onslaught that the Russians are throwing their way.
Okay.
No surprises in that what it essentially does is confirm the core analysis of the 21 review. But what it says is events in Ukraine, and really also I would add, though it doesn't explicitly say this, what came out of the pandemic have really confirmed and allowed the team to calibrate what were left as slightly open questions last time. So it's really almost doubling down on where it was, and it is tying off some of the loose ends and addressing some of the criticisms that were made of the previous report.
Right, I want to drill down into one or two of the bits of really quite important detail with you in a moment. But Ed, did you contribute to the review?
Well, like 100 other people, one was associated with it and wrote papers and provided advice. I don't want to claim any more than that.
Okay, so just tell me, what was your contribution? What point were you keen to get across?
Well, at the time, I was the Director General of Joint Force Development, as the Air Marshal in charge of that, and we were the futurologists of the military, really. So we wrote things such as the future operating concept, and we looked at how technological advances were going to shape the battlefield. Those have been proved, I'd argue, in Ukraine, where even a country with Ukraine's resources is now using commercially provided cloud and satellite, Musk satellite. It's linking information much quicker than even some of the established militaries can. And then it's knitting together some old and some new weaponry to do things along with drones in a very new way. So we were advising the team on what the future defence and military environment might look like, so they could stitch that into the broader concerns about security and national resilience.
Okay, so looking then at the lessons of the battlefield in Ukraine and the big points that you drew out before the war started, and put that against the background of £5 billion extra over 2 years for the MOD, should we be worried about this country's readiness to do a serious job of work in terms of defence, alone or with allies?
I think that last point is where I'll start, with allies. We have tended to go it alone a bit since 1989. We've been involved in a lot of what was sometimes called, I would argue about the phrase, but for now, wars of choice, Iraq and Afghanistan, with a major partner, the US. And we fulfilled our obligations to NATO, but without much enthusiasm. Some other countries didn't do much other than pay their contributions into NATO. And I think what we're seeing now, and it comes out of this report loud and clear in almost every line, is the UK can't do anything on its own. In fact, the US has admitted it can't do anything on its own. Yeah. And it's saying we need to absolutely get involved in those key alliances, the formal alliances like NATO, but there will be many others. AUKUS is an example. The Prime Minister's talking about it today, where we need to work with like-minded nations to address the challenges of today. And you've seen that, I guess, as well with the Prime Minister's trip to France recently.
Right, so we couldn't, as a country, do anything alone. And it's hard to imagine a serious conflict where we would be fighting alone. But even given the importance of working and fighting as part of a defensive military alliance, is £5 billion extra over 2 years anything like enough to do the job?
That all hinges on whether you get the correct reform in defence. You've only got to look at some of the numbers, John, and we've been spending somewhere around £50 billion in the last year. So this takes it to 55. Ukraine's is 4. Poland has just bought an extra 1,000 tanks and an extra 685 155 mil self-propelled guns. Has a budget of 18. So we do somehow expand the whole process of running a military, massively overcomplicated, and that whole process seems to chew up a lot of cash before we actually end up with equipment on the front line. Yes. Of which I would guess the current major example is the Army's Ajax program, which is now late. It's been running 10 years. It's spent just over 4 billion of the 5.5, I think, allocated, and as yet we haven't seen one infantry fighting vehicle, essentially a small tank or an armoured personnel carrier, actually delivered to the army. So if we continue to waste money, no, there isn't enough money. But if we reform and simplify and start doing things in the way that, say, the Finns do, defence budget of 7 billion a year, then yes, the money is there.
Right. Now, should we be doing more then as a country and as a member of the alliance behind Ukraine? Should we be doing more for Ukraine? And in particular, Ed, with your old Air Vice Marshal's hat on, I read a report a couple of weeks back or more suggesting that this country may be supplying Poland with British jets, and they would then, to backfill, as it were, while they pass on their F-35s to Ukraine. Is that an answer?
Well, I think it was Poland's passing on its MiG-29s, wasn't it?
The MiGs, the MiGs on the old MiGs, and we backfill with high quality modern aircraft. Is that a way through?
As part of a package, it might be, but you'd have to think through the whole package. And the obvious thing to me is the limited amount of army equipment we have at the moment. Building on what I just said before on Ajax, I think James Heappey admitted in the House. I think he said within about 30 days. The army would be able to make about 150 of its tanks serviceable. As I said, Poland's getting an extra 1,000, so 150 is not a lot. There's an opportunity here to actually use those for what they were designed to do, which is defeat the Russian threat in Europe. After all, we're not going to be actually defending the UK homeland with those tanks. So use them for their core purpose, and then think through how you might then recapitalise the army. Yeah, the army does need recapitalising, but the army has had a lot of capital over the last 10 years. It hasn't spent it wisely. So this might be an opportunity to draw a line under that, use some of that equipment, give it to Ukraine, and rebuild the army in line with our allies. And I could, go off another 5 minutes on, keeping these things simple and sustainable. In the air, slightly different question, purely because no matter how sophisticated the aeroplanes need the full panoply of air power for them to work properly. F-16s is what's normally talked about going to Ukraine. It's not just you fly an F-16 and it's a wonder jet. You need electronic warfare aircraft. You need airborne command and control. You need suppression of enemy air defences. NATO's been working 70 years since the end of since the end of the Second World War to generate this sort of capability. The Ukrainian Air Force isn't going to be able to do it overnight. And that's probably what's behind the US reluctance to hand over F-16s. They're not a game changer if you can't use them in the way that NATO can. That doesn't mean there isn't some middle ground. And that would be the package that I'd like to see given to Ukraine. Some better electronic warfare, integrate F-16s with a better use of drones, some better surface-to-air missile capability to keep the Russian Air Force on the back foot. And then the Ukrainians would get some of that localized air superiority and some relief from the onslaught that the Russians are throwing their way.
Okay. Well, I'm John Pienaar, and if you found that interesting, we are here each day, Monday to Thursday, 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Drive, and from 7 till 8, Pienaar and Friends, where we discuss the big stories of the day each day on Times Radio.